Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel. So if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land, we're here for you. I'm Ladar Gavelazi, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review.
And the leader of the small Gaza terror group, Mujahideen Brigades, was killed in an Israeli airstrike, the military confirms. His elimination brings a close to deep tragedy for Israeli families, as the IDF says he was responsible for the murders and abductions of Shiri Bibas and her two children, Ariel and Kafir, Americans Judy Weinstein and Gadi Chagai, and a Thai hostage, Pinta Netapong. Here's what else you need to know. In a joint IDF and Shin Bet operation, the military says Assad Abu Sharia, the head of the terror group Mujahideen Brigades, was killed in an airstrike in Gaza City nearly 20 months after invading Kibbutz Nir Oz and abducting and murdering Israelis and foreign nationals. One of the leaders of the massacre in Nir Oz on October 7th, the IDF says Sharia was directly involved in the abduction and murder of Shiri, Ariel, and Kafir Bibas, who the IDF has previously described as being murdered in November of 2023, quote, in cold blood with bare hands. The Bibas family issued a statement saying the elimination, quote, marks another step in our journey towards closure and accepting the tremendous loss of Shiri, Ariel, and Kafir, and thanking the IDF soldiers and security forces for their unwavering commitment. The IDF says Sharia was also responsible for the abduction of the bodies of American hostages Judy Weinstein and Gadi Chagai, who were recovered last week in a special operation. Their bodies were in the hands of the brigades after being murdered and then abducted from Kibbutz Nir Oz. Meanwhile, over the weekend, the body of a Thai hostage was also recovered in a special operation deep in Rafah. Kidnapped alive from Kibbutz Nir Oz, where he was a farmer, the IDF says Sharia is also responsible for his abduction and murder while in captivity. The IDF says the Mujahideen Brigades was unaware of Hamas's plans on October 7th, but acted as an extension and utilized their terrorist framework during the attack. They say the terror group is now holding the body of another foreign national. And fears continue to grow for the remaining living hostages after Hamas published a new threat on hostage Matan Zain-Kauker, releasing this image of him on Sunday. Hamas's spokesperson claims the IDF is operating where Zain-Kauker is being held and that its operations are endangering his life. Reports say the IDF does not have a current operation attempting to rescue him. France condemned recent Israeli airstrikes in Beirut and said they were in violation of the November 2024 ceasefire. Over the weekend, the IDF struck underground Hezbollah drone factories in Beirut. The attacks came after what Israel called the blatant violation of November's ceasefire while preparing for future war. The statement from Paris said there is a monitoring mechanism in place established by the ceasefire agreement, and the dismantling of unauthorized military sites is a priority for the Lebanese armed forces. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of Lebanon says their army has dismantled 500 Hezbollah sites. Now, the strikes were carried out on several buildings in Beirut's southern suburb after a warning was issued to evacuate those buildings. Now, the army said it hit buildings used by Hezbollah to manufacture drones by Hezbollah forces known as Unit 127. The army identified the unit was working to produce thousands of UAVs under the guidance and funding of Iranian terror officials. And a new report says materials for producing ballistic missiles Iran ordered from China is expected to arrive within the coming months. The new report says the shipment for the materials was agreed likely before President Trump's announcement for proposed nuclear talks with the supreme leader of Iran. The materials ordered, according to the report, said that Tehran ordered enough to potentially create up to 800 ballistic missiles. The reporting suggests that Iran is working to reestablish itself and its proxy terror network in the Middle East militarily.
And the U.S.-backed aid group GHF is back on the ground in Gaza, reopening food distribution sites just days after Hamas threats forced a temporary shutdown. More on this now from ILTV's Maayan Hoffman.
The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GHF, resumed food distribution across Gaza this week after it had suspended operations due to what it called direct threats from Hamas. According to GHF, the threats targeted its staff, including a message warning they were being monitored and would face serious consequences if they continued distributing aid under the quote-unquote guise of humanitarian work. Despite the danger, GHF says it is determined to continue feeding Gaza's civilians. On Sunday, the group distributed 17,000 food boxes at 3 sites in Rafah and central Gaza. And it delivered 11 trucks of supplies directly to community leaders in northern Rafah. These deliveries are part of a new pilot program to bypass Hamas interference by bringing aid directly to civilians instead of centralized depots. A GHF spokesperson said trucks are now delivering boxes directly to people in population hubs, minimizing exposure to threats and reducing crowd pressure at main centers. The foundation has also introduced a women and children only lane to ensure safer and more equitable distribution. Operations are being secured in part by the Abu Shabaab militia, an anti-Hamas armed group reportedly backed with Israeli-supplied weapons. While its leader, Yasser Abu Shabaab, denies collaborating with Israel, Israeli sources have confirmed to the Walla news agency that the militia is protecting distribution convoys and guarding aid centers in Rafah. Since May 26, GHF has distributed nearly 9 million meals. The U.S.-backed nonprofit says it is actively adapting its model and remains flexible under grossly unstable conditions. Meanwhile, Reuters reported that the U.S. is considering a $500 million aid package for GHF via U.S. aid.
And joining us now with more on the Iranian threat and the ongoing nuclear talks between Washington and Tehran is our very own ILTV News anchor and executive board member at the Institute for Voices of Liberty, Emily Schrader, and Ben Khan Taleblu, research fellow specializing in Iran for the Foundation of Defense of Democracies. Thank you both for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Pleasure.
So, Emily, let's start with you. You know, President Trump held a phone call with Prime Minister Netanyahu in the Islamic Republic of Iran was at the top of the agenda. How aligned are the U.S. and Israeli governments on this issue? And is there a concern that the U.S. could spring a surprise deal on Israel?
Well, I think that's always been a concern. As soon as it was announced that Trump was going to be holding talks with the Islamic Republic of Iran, the agendas aren't completely aligned. We've repeatedly seen Trump sort of waffle back and forth, at least initially, before confirming ultimately that under no circumstances would there be enrichment allowed, both through Witkoff himself, who stated that, and also multiple Trump officials from Secretary of State Rubio to the president himself. Since then, we've seen a very strong message of that, one that was reiterated in the story that you just ran. That being said, Trump is also very, very adamant about trying to make a deal. And it's very important at this point that a deal isn't made that is reminiscent of the JCPOA, which, of course, Trump withdrew from during his first term. And that is actually what the Islamic Republic is trying to get through right now, a 3.67 enrichment in their nuclear proliferation. That's something, of course, that the U.S. and Israel should absolutely not allow.
Mm-hmm. And Ben, I'm turning to you. You know, the negotiations have been dragging on for quite some time now. And yesterday, following the call, President Trump called the Iranians great negotiators, almost sounded like praise. You know, the president has repeatedly stated that he prefers a diplomatic deal, as Emily just mentioned, but a military option remains on the table. But the Iranians seem to be holding their ground despite the threats, despite Trump's comments. You know, the regime is the weakest it's ever been. So how could they afford to reject this U.S. proposal? I mean, do the Ayatollahs believe Trump is simply bluffing?
Well, it's important to connect a few dots here. Weak doesn't mean not lethal. Weak doesn't mean not dangerous. The Islamic Republic of Iran is still home to the largest ballistic missile arsenal in the Middle East, the largest drone arsenal in the Middle East. It's the only country producing this level of highly enriched uranium without having first produced nuclear weapons. It's the only country in the world to first produce a 2,000-kilometer ballistic missile at home without first producing nuclear weapons. So there's everything and a whole host of reasons that makes the Islamic Republic exceptionally dangerous despite its weak social, economic, political, regional, environmental, what have you, position. Now, what they are counting on, actually, is President Trump's rhetoric and the overall post-Bush administration U.S. desire to do less in the Middle East, not more, as basically functioning as a human shield between them and a potential preemptive Israeli military attack. Make no mistake, Iran is engaging now, but they're not engaging in good faith. They're engaging to buy time. They're engaging to basically have snapback expire, which could happen by October of this year. They're engaging to put distance between America and its most important ally in the Middle East, which is Israel. And they're engaging ultimately to downplay the increasingly hawkish position we've seen from the Europeans over the past few years because of warming Iran-Russia ties. So they're doing all of these things to buy time, put distance, and to isolate America. So this is very much a return to the normal divide and conquer diplomatic strategy we've seen from the Islamic Republic when its back has been against the wall.
And Emily, I want to hear your thoughts on this as well. I mean, how can the Iranian regime really afford to stand up to the United States of America, the great United States of America? I mean, what game are they playing at? And given the current climate in the Trump administration, as Ben had mentioned, the America First vision, how likely is it that the U.S. would actually strike Iran?
Well, I mean, I think that remains to be seen. We're going to have to see how it plays out with the nuclear talks and what the response is from the Islamic Republic if they actually are able to make some kind of a deal, whether or not it's to Israel's liking. But I actually agree in full with what Ben said about the situation with the Islamic Republic. It's very clear that what they're doing when it comes to these negotiations is buying time. Their interest is trying to strengthen their position within the region in order to achieve sanction relief, and in order to continue their, frankly, genocidal agenda for the state of Israel, ultimately the United States as well, and of course destabilization efforts throughout the region that we see them backing the Houthis. We've already seen them investing in potential future proxy terror groups in Sudan. There's been a lot of activity on that front, and I think the absolute worst step that could happen is going soft on the Islamic Republic right now. What really needs to happen and what really is going to bring about an actual change in the region ultimately is only going to come with regime change. Now, hopefully that isn't something that has to happen through a war. This is something the majority of the Iranian people really, really want to achieve, regardless of the nuclear issue. But we're not going to see a significant change in the region and in the activities of the Islamic Republic through a deal, even if a nuclear deal is made.
Mm-hmm. And Ben, what kind of a time frame are we looking at? I mean, how long can these negotiations continue to drag out? The U.S. has already given a proposal. Iran is expected to give its counter proposal. I mean, how much longer are we looking at?
Well, if you ask me, it's already gone on too long. I think there's certainly ample predicate for the president to push away from the table here. But make no mistake, I think that's what the Iranians are trying to force the U.S. to do. The Iranians have this narrative, despite the Islamic Republic of Iran being the least good faith or the most bad faith actor here. They're trying to say Trump left the deal in 2018. They're trying to do things to wear out Trump's patience, potentially have him leave the table again, maybe have this be the casus belli for them to go for the potential atomic weapon. We don't know. But one thing is clear, is that this largely needs to be a political issue, not a technical issue. The reason the Iranians are able to drag it on so long is because they're not meeting the one political red line set by the Trump administration, which is no enrichment and full dismantlement. What the Iranians are trying to do is find multiple technical ways to water down that political position. And if the president or the Trump administration or even the West really gives Tehran the time, these kind of talks can go on for years because Tehran will continue to try to find a way to square peg and round hole Washington into agreeing something that is not conform with its own political red lines. And let me just say here, yes, the Iranians have said for many, many years that they would never stop enriching and that they've never dismantled. But the supplicant does not get to dictate red lines to the superpower here. So even looking at this issue of the timeline and the red lines from an America First agenda, caving into Tehran's demands and playing to their timeline simply makes zero sense.
Mm-hmm. And Emily, if the Trump administration does eventually reach a deal, maybe it does secure an end to uranium enrichment. Does this truly minimize the Iranian threat? What about, as you mentioned, its funding of terrorism, its drone and ballistic missile productions, and so on?
I think this is the problem and why there are many Iranian dissidents who have been quite critical of the fact there are negotiations in the first place. Obviously, as an Israeli, first and foremost, Israel's interest is in ensuring that there is no nuclear weapon, also from the perspective of the United States. But that doesn't actually solve the problem because the IRGC activities, the ballistic missiles, as Ben mentioned, all of these activities that the regime has been doing for decades since the Islamic Revolution in '79 is something that isn't being addressed at all by a nuclear deal. At least that's not what's on the table right now. And if we're actually going to curb the terrorist activities of the Islamic regime throughout the region, not just Israel, but throughout the region, then that also has to be addressed. Now, is that something that would be addressed in a nuclear deal? Probably not, as it seems so far, but it's definitely something that needs to be dealt with at some point sooner or later.
And Ben, I want to ask one final question. Why is the Trump administration so hesitant towards striking Iran and towards regime change in Iran?
Well, as you know, where I work and live and sit in Washington, D.C., the RC word is perhaps the ultimate no-no word. It's the ultimate nasty word, and that's largely the hangover of the Bush administration. Whether you look at the Obama administration, the Trump administration, or the Biden administration, every U.S. candidate for a higher office, particularly with a focus on foreign policy, has been able to get more votes by promising to do less in the Middle East, not more. Again, that is largely because of the botched experience and the hangover of 2003 Iraq. Obviously, as Emily and you and your viewers know, standing with the Iranian people, both in principle and in practice, need not at all look like the disaster that was Iraq pre or post 2003. But the problem is that that large political framing has taken both sides of the aisle, the left and the right here, where I work in Washington, hostage. And so long as America is hostage to this nightmare, it can never really wake up to actually deal with the root of the many fires of the Middle East, which is the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
All right, Emily, Ben Khan, thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you.
And activists from the so-called Gaza Freedom Flotilla, better known as the Selfie Yacht, were taken to Ben Gurion Airport for deportation from Israel. But once there, only 4, including Greta Thunberg, agreed to leave, while the other 8 activists are refusing. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz has the latest.
High-profile activist Greta Thunberg was placed on a plane and deported to Sweden. 4 of the activists, including Thunberg, left Israel voluntarily. The 8 others refused to leave and were taken to Givon detention facility. The deportation move against high-profile Thunberg and pro-Palestinian comrades took place only a day after their small aid ship was stopped by the Navy and taken to Ashdod, where they remained in custody overnight. Those who refuse to sign deportation documents to willingly leave Israel will be brought to a judicial authority to authorize their deportations. Consuls from the activists' home countries met them at the airport. The yacht Marlin docked at Ashdod port nearly 24 hours after being intercepted by Israeli Navy commandos. This after they ignored orders to change course away from the Gaza coastline. Thunberg and the 11 other activists set sail from Sicily on June 1st. Defense Minister Katz said this about the decision to seize the yacht and passengers, which the Israeli Foreign Ministry called a selfie yacht.
הנחיתי את צה"ל להקרין בפני נושא המשט את סרטון הזוועות של טבח ה-7 באוקטובר כאשר יגיעו לנמל אשדוד. ראוי שגרטה האנטישמית וחבריה, תומכי החמאס, יראו בדיוק מיהו ארגון הטרור חמאס, שבו באו לתמוך ולמענו הם פועלים, מהם מעשי הזוועה שביצעו בנשים, זקנים וילדים, ומול מי ישראל נלחמת להגנתה.
U.S. President Trump weighed in on his thoughts about Greta Thunberg's action.
Do you have a message for Greta Thunberg, and did she come up on your call with the Prime Minister today?
Well, she's a strange person. She's a young, angry person. I don't know if it's real anger. It's hard to believe, actually, but I saw what happened. She's certainly different. Anger management. I think she has to go to an anger management class.
Do you
That's
think
my primary recommendation for her.
Was she kidnapped by Israel, as she says? Was she kidnapped?
I think Israel has enough problems without kidnapping Greta Thunberg.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now saying significant progress has been made in negotiations about a hostage and ceasefire deal. It's the second time in the last few weeks the Prime Minister signaled some type of advancement, but nothing concrete has happened yet. ILTV's Shosh Bedrosian covers the hostage crisis for us and has the details.
As 55 hostages remain in the darkness in Gaza in Hamas captivity without providing any details, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now providing an update on the ongoing efforts to free the hostages in negotiations.
יש התקדמות משמעותית. אני חושב שמוקדם מדי לתת תקוות, אבל אנחנו פועלים ללא הרף בשעות האלה וכל הזמן אני מקווה שנוכל להתקדם.
Within the last few days, Hamas submitted their response to U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff's proposal, with Witkoff calling them, quote, unacceptable. Reports indicate countries like Qatar are working to advance the deal and resolve issues for both sides, but especially to soften Hamas's stance on their response. Issues that stand in the way include Hamas wanting to end the war and stay armed, as Israel and Witkoff are pushing for a ceasefire that lasts for 60 days, although Israel is saying it won't agree to end the war completely. The Prime Minister's office said in a statement Netanyahu met with Defense Minister Israel Katz, IDF Chief Eyal Zamir, Strategic Affairs Minister Don Dermer, and other members of the negotiating team. The statement went on to say that Netanyahu is meeting with them to receive updates on the framework and for the release of the hostages and to discuss next steps. Intelligence work by special Israeli forces has resulted in the successful recovery operations of located and bringing home 3 bodies of hostages that were kidnapped from Kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th, which includes American hostages Judy Weinstein, Gadi Chagai, and a Thai hostage, Nenapong Pinta. Officials had hoped a breakthrough would happen around the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Adha, which ended on Tuesday. Surprising comments from President Trump this week came to light when he said on Monday that Iran is involved in negotiations aimed at securing the release of the hostages. Now, 2 American hostages remain in Hamas captivity at this time, which are the bodies of Long Island native Omer Nutra and American-Israeli Itai Chen. The IDF says both of them were killed on October 7th, and their bodies were dragged into Gaza by terrorists.
Day 614 of the war in Gaza. Over the past 24 hours, Operation Gideon's Chariots continued to roll throughout the Gaza Strip. At the same time, IDF anti-terror ops were active in the Nablus Kasbah in Samaria. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz reports.
In Gaza, during an operation by the Givati Brigade, the forces identified and eliminated 2 terrorists who were posing as women. They were carrying sacks from a military building used by the terrorists. In further activity, weapons were located, including rocket launchers. Targets attacked included terror tunnels, weapons depots, and other military infrastructure used by Hamas. Turning to Samaria, where a major anti-terror operation was conducted in Nablus. 2 gunmen were killed and 4 soldiers lightly wounded in the overnight maneuvers. The joint IDF, Shin Bet, and Border Police operation was conducted inside the crowded Nablus Kasbah. Security forces searched over 250 buildings and seized weapons from terrorists and wanted men. Additional operations in the Menashe area led to the arrests of 4 wanted men in Tulkarem.
For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv or download the ILTV Plus app. That's it for ILTV's weekly review. See you next week.